right. But hello, everyone. Some of you may already know me, but I'm Dai Li. I like to think that I got my start in creating delightful experiences in artificial worlds and really my professional career as the mouse at Chuck E. Cheese, dancing for children's birthdays, and then, of course, afterwards for creating video games. Currently, I'm an AI product designer, and my body of work was in the automation space previously, creating AMRs, autonomous mobile robots, that work alongside people, delivering items, material handling, floor cleaning, and managing inventory at Brain Corporation. And now with enterprise intelligent automation with ServiceNow. I design AI implementation pipelines that help people utilize machine learning from the lens of business use cases as opposed to model technology, and create systems that augment, assist, and accelerate how people work. But I think the most important thing of what I do as a technology creator and communicator is that I like the dominant portion of my work lies in this continued dialogue in pursuing creating responsible AI. And thank you for having me here today. And thank you for everyone that's joining. And for whoever's watching this later, thank you for messaging me saying you tried to join. I really appreciate being able to have this discussion from like a design perspective.
Yeah, and that leads us into why we are here today. The topic is AI from a design perspective. So I would like to open up with our first question, and that is, why does the conversation of design matter?
Ooh, that is a loaded question. It's a question that's like probably as old as time when people are talking about why doorknobs are terrible and stuff. But I love this topic, and I feel really lucky to get to speak about especially design and responsible AI from the design perspective, because most of the time when you look at the global dialogue surrounding data and privacy governance and ethical AI, almost all of the time the focus is on the technology, creating robust and explainable models, much needed considerations on how to handle the life cycle of a person's data, and ensuring the algorithms and data sets have frameworks and safe gaps to mitigate bias. Like these are really important, but the impact of automation permeates so much farther than the models themselves. The models are just the first part. They go on to support supply and services and goods and systems that people have to interface with, whether voluntary or as innocent vicinity bystanders. So as creators, we have this responsibility to safeguard those expectations and be deliberate and considerate towards how our AI systems impact people. Going back on the conversation of bias, many times the considerations around bias are focused around the data sets that drive the models, but design research and design really guides the products that these technologies become and how they are built. So it's important that we include a diverse group of individuals when we're conducting research, market research, competitive analysis, and considering like, are we testing these interfaces and product experiences with groups of people that could be marginalized by the technology, or maybe extending your research beyond people that are not your primary functional users. Considering, did we include individuals from different levels of technical immersion or literacy? Designers by professional nature, and I know there are some on this roundtable discussion today, are already thinking about how the products they create impact people. And I think with mitigating potential risks associated with AI, and even navigating the social and political apprehension associated with AI, it becomes even more important to take that human-centered design approach that we've all learned about and heard about and read about with technology, and be even more immersive in creating AI experiences in the same thought process.
That is such a wonderful and detailed answer to our first question.
Also very long-winded. You can tell I care about this.
And how do you incorporate ethics into the design of AI?
I think one of the first things that require a bigger conversation is that designers are not just the sole sword wielders of the responsibility of designing ethics into their product. Um, I think it needs to be a collaborative conversation. I think more than anything, designers are conversation builders and facilitators between people, the creators and the technical teams that create this technology, and then also the product teams that are looking to fulfill a need or a gap in some sort of market. I think one of the first things is applying the same rigor of cognizant bias in data sets. That same bias assessment has to be brought into the design research from the product conception point all the way through product validation. Um, in talking about being inclusive, an interface is more than just a UI screen. When I was designing for robotics, the screen was the first point of contact where we could say what the operational function, the duration of process, and the motions and behaviors of the machine are doing. But thinking about it, inclusivity, can someone who's vision impaired be safe around your automated system? Can someone who is hearing impaired be able to visually or be visually communicative and understanding of what your system is doing? And I think a big part of that is looking beyond just the intended users of the product and looking at the full chain of impact users. For example, going back to robotics, we have the operators, but we also have people that are in the store or that are working alongside the robot that have zero interest in your technology. With enterprise solutions, we are responsible to our customers who pay us, but we're also responsible for their customers and the industries that they serve and who the communities they impact.
Definitely. And you've already touched on this a bit, but what are some more examples of AI in practice that you would view as upholding ethical standards?
Ah, this is also a very much loaded question because I think when we look at the landscape of companies that are AI companies that are kind of championing ethics and championing trustworthiness and championing creating AI that services humans, it's really hard to discern whether companies are engaging in these efforts due to public and government pressure or out of the goodness of their hearts because it's the right thing to do. And I think depending on the region of the world that you live in and your political history of how people were treated when you have one body of power, it's very much prevalent in how they treat data privacy and how policies are built to kind of construct these different services and technologies that companies are building. Where, in an example, America is very laissez-faire. There was a huge disclaimer leading into some of my answers that I have for this, because a lot of the companies that I'm going to be mentioning, though are creating great efforts, they've also have a historical record of not doing some great things. One example that's not company specific are a lot of the companies that are engaging in autonomous mobile robots, drone robotics, self-driving vehicles, and autonomous vehicles and other types of motion where they use cameras that aid in motion planning, mapping, navigation. But they have gone through the efforts of creating technology now and like computer vision algorithms where it automatically, to some degree of accuracy, it still needs to be vetted, blurring out the faces of individuals to protect their identities. So the purpose of these cameras is purely for navigation. So technically a person's face can still be helped to identify them as a human, but their identity doesn't need to be part of some massive database somewhere. Something else that I found really interesting, and mainly because I'm going through the process of submitting an app for another project that I'm working on, is that Apple recently updated their terms and services with their mobile developers, where if to any degree an app is tracking user behavior from the clicks to knowing their name and their identity and their birthday and their gender, as a first launch on the application, mobile developers now have to be transparent in the data that they're capturing, why they're capturing it, and also allow an end user to reject and revoke permissions. And I think that's kind of a trend that's going on right now, where people are becoming more inclined to understanding the data that they're providing to companies and are requesting and pushing the hand of companies to allow them to control that life cycle of access around their data. And one of the reasons why I joined ServiceNow, not to just promote the company, but it is a reason why I joined, is due to their extremely stringent stance on data privacy. Sometimes to the limit of like being able to innovate because they're so strict and protective around customer data. The European Union's General Data Protection Regulation (GDPR), it probably is the toughest privacy and security law in the world, and ServiceNow partnered with them to build compliance in their data practices. One thing that I'm looking at recently, and again, to really emphasize, social media companies have their long history of problematic behaviors around privacy and handling ethical behaviors when it comes to automation. Is TikTok, very early on when TikTok first launched with filters, they would label the creator and the type of filter being used. And it was great for this this transparency around visual fallacy that exists in social media. That was one example I really liked seeing. And another one that's been kind of going around the circles in the past couple of years is Instagram testing removing of the like button. Because oftentimes the like button will drive algorithms on what a person on their feed sees, what type of ads they receive, what type of content gets weighted most. But there isn't enough research into like why people like certain things. And on the adverse too, like how people react to how many likes they have on social media feeds. Those are just a few examples.
Yeah, those are some wonderful examples, especially when you were mentioning the fact that sometimes companies are collecting data that they don't need or they don't know why they're even collecting it. And
Yeah,
I
that
think
ties
that's
back to on like I forgot to mention this when you were asking like what are some design methods of assessing and adding more ethical frameworks into like the design process. And oftentimes it's asking the question, especially with designers and working together with data scientists and engineering teams, like, are we collecting the minimal amount of data needed? Are we collecting more than we need? Do we even need to automate this? Can this be something that is solved by design as opposed to a machine learning algorithm?
definitely, yeah. And on that same note, what are some important things to keep in mind when developing algorithms that will be used in the real world?
There's a lot of when I think about it, there's a lot of great foundational frameworks. I think with the surge of automation, and even in expert automation and hyper automation and robotic process automation, not just intelligent automation, people and companies really rush to the forefront to start building out all of these frameworks um, to really drive how people interface with technology. And I think when I extract kind of my favorite best parts from all of these frameworks that we study and these principles that we write, is that there has to be a subset of questions and conversations that first happen between designers, PMs, and data scientists that start together from the market research and competitive analysis when you're trying to assess a need in a problem area or create a problem or create a solution for a problem. Oftentimes what happens now is, a problem gets presented and engineering PMs and data scientists get together and they kind of formulate this robust solution that they think will help. And then design comes in and they go, okay, design, make this pleasant or, make this a wonderful experience. And I think that collaborative conversation and vice versa too, like having all of those parties influence the design conversations early on are really needed collaborations. Some of the questions that need to be asked first, before that needs to take precedence over innovation and take precedence over how fancy your technology is is like, what real world problems are we solving? When we're interviewing customers and learning about their pain points, are we actually designing things that are solving their pain points, or are we using their pain points as leverage to justify automating away a task, which is just kind of band-aiding a greater problem, and leading to more problems. And like, again, like, do we need to automate a task entirely, or can we mitigate risk while elevating a role or augmenting a task? I think there's this need to have humans in the loop to create more robust technologies, because people know their space, they know their industry, they know their customers, and there's this historical knowledge that doesn't come with immediately generating an AI model. And with that too, it's this this I think a big nuance right now, and it's a hard thing to get past, and I don't think the industry solved for it yet, is we have to get past this level of measuring ROI by human factors. Like, a lot of times models, designs, things that get validated are measured around how many human hours are saved, or like, did how long does it take a human to do it versus how long does it take an AI to do it. Same with cost of salary. I think it's a disservice to the technology and to the people themselves to have those be the primary metrics. Um, and, really emphasizing, do we need intelligent automation? I really, there's a beauty in simplistic solutions that are design solutions that doesn't require expansive data or training a model. One example that's going through our channels right now at work that we've been discussing is there's this whole feature that Twitter put together that launched a million memes, where they were using machine learning and like computer vision to automatically crop an image to a specific place. And now their research, I'm glad they're putting due diligence to it, but they're finding that like that crop was biased towards men. It was like marginalizing people. And it was just such an obvious thing where, when we look at that, I'm sure designers are rolling their eyes thinking, or you could just let end users pick where to crop the photo or where to preview, or, adjust the layout the way Facebook does, where you can put this photo in a different place. There were so many design solutions for that feature that didn't need AI to solve that. And then I think the biggest consideration is like, who are all of the people that are going to be impacted by your AI system? Did you go through that exercise of like, who are your customers? What industries are you impacting? What is the level of technical literacy around those that are going to be using your technology? And then lastly, if a person grants you access to the data, like, can they revoke that? Or if they granted you research opinion on one thing and that changes, like, how do we create ongoing research systems that ebb and flow with someone's AI maturity or technical maturity? A long-winded answer, I know.
No, but absolutely. I mean, especially like it's almost like when it comes to overfitting machine learning models, it sounds like we're almost like overfitting our design solutions. There doesn't always have to be a super complicated solution.
Yeah.
So, what advice do you have to data scientists that are newly entering the field?
Oh, feel weird speaking on this just because I'm not a data scientist myself, as even despite being a person that loves data. Um, I think it's the same advice that I would give to designers and other creators that are entering this field, which is, it is just as important to have conversations about the technology, but more so, it's equally or even more important to have ones about the people at risk who are using your technology. And the funny thing is, oftentimes, especially on a lot of the projects I'm on, um, if the product is an internal product that's going to be not customer facing, that risk mitigation conversation reduces substantially. When it's like, wait, the people that work at your company are also people. They're also people impacted by this technology. So really, like, adding that same weight of responsibility no matter where your end user works. That's a big one. I think the second one is allowing technical teams and facilitating technical teams, and especially if you're a data scientist now, making yourself available and present to be involved in the conception research phase conversations. Um, Many times it's the PMs, designers, and researchers that get to do the competitive analysis, look at the market, really get the conversations and the nuanced problem statements that customers and people are addressing. And the technical team only ever hears that story from a PowerPoint, a slide deck, maybe a couple recordings. And I think it's important to have them be able to ask questions and be able to build that empathy by viewing firsthand the storytelling from someone who is going to be impacted by your technology.
Definitely.
Did I answer
Yeah.
the question? Did I cheat out of that one? By going
No,
super broad.
no, that was a really good answer. It was really insightful too. And I know you said that you don't consider yourself a data scientist, but I've heard so many data scientists say, "Oh, I'm not really a data scientist." So, what do you foresee in the future of AI?
It's cool. When you ask that question, it's like for some reason my work life flashes before my eyes, and then so does every like sci-fi pop culture cool innovation, because it's like on one hand I'm like, whoa, what a time to be alive. And on another hand, I'm like, wow, what does it mean for like automation when like quantum computing becomes a thing? But like coming more near term, I think a welcome welcome transition as automation and technology continue to be scrutinized, and as we continue to have discussions like this, and the conversation of standards continues, is the perspective of AI as a utility with realistic applications and expectations, as opposed to sci-fi notions and assumptions of AI's positioning of capability to entirely solve all the world's problems and replace humanity entirely. I know it's weird because as someone that works in the field, it's because of the interest in automation and, playing with transformers as a kid that I really got into this field. But I think I'm like itching at the point where we can start talking about AI the same way we talk about IDEs, like development environments, or we talk about cars and really just as a utility. Um, I think another thing that I'm looking at in the future is like as industries change, so will the way we work. And I think if we want to surmount the social stigma and apprehension surrounding automation, the focus of trustworthiness and building AI as a service to aid humanity is going to have to take precedence. You can't move a reluctant populace with just sheer innovation alone. Like we really have to. There's real problems out there that we could solve with more simple solutions. While I understand that the pursuit of innovation is necessary, I think like those are things that I'm really embracing and hoping for this new future.
Yeah, I think that's it's a great vision. I Yeah, I mean, only time can tell. We'll see what happens. So that concludes the questions for our interview portion. But now I would like to open up the floor. If anybody else has questions, I will go first because I actually have a question myself. And that is, as a cognitive scientist, do you think we should be making machine learning models more like humans?
I think it depends on the industry that you're in. So when I was conducting research at Brain on different levels of audible cues and how people um, treated technical entities that were somewhat personified, it was really varying depending on the application. So on one hand, we talk about uncanny valley all the time, like humanistic things start to freak people out. I think to some degree, like when it comes to the entertainment industry, industries that are meant to, or applications that are meant to evoke a response, emotion, or some sort of affinity to the technology, I think it's incredibly useful. For example, one thing I appreciate about smart speakers, though it's challenging at first when NLU capabilities were in their and natural language understanding were in their infancy, was that by nature, because people know how to converse with each other by adopting a human-like experience in dialogue, they were able to train a population of people who never interfaced with smart speakers on how to do it. So in that application, I think being humanistic while still being very transparent on technical limitation, um, it's a good thing. I think in other areas, though, less the focus should be less on how much like us technology can be, and more so how much technology can function as like a tool. And I swear I didn't try to bypass that answer. It's very nuanced. But I'm more on the I err more on the side of, like, if there's already a social stigma around people feeling replaced by technology, don't amplify that by making technology more like the people that fear being replaced. But it's
That
okay
is
to
such a good
personify
point.
and make it cute and make it relatable and use human patterns of behavior and understandability to help onboard them onto the tool.
Um, does anybody else have any questions?
I got one, if it's okay for me to go. Yeah, so hi, Di, nice to see you again. So I guess I have a question. So it was kind of related to what are some of the boundaries that, when you're developing or designing an AI system, what are some boundaries that you set when it comes to deciding between, personalizing an algorithm as,
Mhm.
specifically as possible for a use case and maintaining ethical and privacy standards?
Ah, it's so I wanna set the disclaimer before I answer this, like, it has to be a collaborative effort, like, design can raise red flags, which we do quite often, but we don't always have control over what gets created in the end, but it is our job and at the minimum to raise red flags. This is globally hard, and I'm not sure anyone has perfected this balance. Like as a business, I work for an enterprise company that provides solutions to other companies. As a business, your due diligence is to your direct customer, but the impact of what you make creates the responsibility can like really further those considerations. I think at a minimum, I always start by asking at least challenging questions of whether a feature or product could potentially have negative impact on an individual. Just a hypothetical example, this didn't happen. I'm not going to say one way or another, but let's just say you're designing a monitoring system. It's been in the news. A lot of companies have talked about doing this, where the mandate is we need to design a monitoring system to help the company gauge its employees' productivity. And that feature and that product may financially benefit them, and the machine learning model may be able to assess to some degree what productivity KPI may be to report back to the business itself. This is where we would come in and say, okay, you know, yes, that may yield more productivity. It may bring the business more money and ROI, but could it cause undue stress on employees? Are there unseen circumstances to contribute to fluctuating productivity? Are the metrics used to measure productivity biased or valid? And instead, what I would push for is another perspective, which is like, what process in the employee's work could we help with that, if we have an existing model, could give insight into this versus that? Again, this is such a hard topic, but at a minimum, it has to start with like considerations for all parties and, who we imagine could be involved and who's being impacted. So the direct answer is like it's yes, we have a due diligence to businesses, but I think where I stand, at least ethically, there has to be like I'll always champion and push to have people at least listen to what some of the negative implications could be. And then in the worst case, I would remove myself from a project if I had no influence over that discussion, to be frank.
All right. Well, anybody else want to ask any questions?
I think it's
Sure.
nearing the end of the week and people are eating ice cream while enjoying this wonderful conversation we're having.
I have cookies.
Hey, Di. Outside of your immediate industry workplace, I'm wondering of the many different kinds of disaster scenarios that could involve AI, what's the one that you personally are most concerned with, and do you think it's solvable with where we stand today?
Yeah. Um, Actually, this is one that I'm working on with the Data Science Alliance, Kayla and Behasia. There's this, and I bring this up a lot. There's two, if I may bring up two. One is the utilization of automation technology to weaponize to automate weapons actually. I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but there's this huge accord that a lot of the world's leading research scientists and data scientists and technologists and companies have signed, and it's an accord where like we will not use our technology, like taking a stance of we will not build autonomous weapons. That's one, and especially everyone always says that's kind of like a far thing, and we're beyond this case of war. But if we look at the political landscape right now and what's going on, and if people had access to autonomous weaponry, how different would some of the political disputes that we're having right now be? So that's probably my number one concern. My number two concern is something that's a little bit more unintentionally nefarious, which is that people have no control right now over their identity and who owns pieces of their identity as identity data. So using a Nest camera or a Ring camera on your door, for example, and this is like a very innocent, product per se, and it offers a lot of good in the sense that it provides security for your home. You get to know who's there, but there's innocent vicinity bystanders that walk by your house that maybe don't want to have their data be recorded um, as a part of that. And one big example of this is, with the protests in Hong Kong, where some of the houses had access to cameras. And because of the nature of political law there, they were able to warrant access to that data from these Ring cameras and like door cameras that people didn't subject themselves to, but like they were able to be outed as protesters because of that. So that's another one where like people are not giving permission for their data to be stored, but yet it is anyway.
I'm really glad you brought that up, Di. I know there's actually something happening right now, and I just sent the link to the chat where this Instagram ad campaign was actually blocked because it was showing users their information. And the whole point of the campaign was showing people, oh, this is your name. You live in this area. And then, it was telling people all sorts of things about their personal information. And you're right, we have no control, not just of what information is being gathered, but what assumptions are being made about us and our identities.
Yeah. And even that thought of ownership, and I don't know if people remember the uproar a few years ago where there was this whole meme and outrage going around Facebook saying like, don't upload your photos and don't upload your artwork to Instagram or Facebook because they own it and they can use it for advertising, and because it was part of the terms of service. And that public outrage and that public movement required them to rewrite their terms of service where they're like, no, we don't have copyright access to your or trademarks to your artwork. We don't own that now, because a lot of people use social media to promote their artwork and their photography and creative work.
Yeah. Do we have any other thoughts or questions?
Or even anything that anyone else wants to engage in discussion wise too.
I just wanted to follow up really quickly on the privacy thing as well. I'm glad you brought up the GDPR and ServiceNow.
Mhm.
Because for us, so I used to be part of, the buying process for the county of San Diego. And pretty much our requirement for whether something was like ethically compliant with our own privacy standards was, is the software compliant with CCPA when it went into effect, which is a lot like GDPR. And I don't know if everybody knows what those laws are, but they essentially require that you allow people to opt in and opt out. In the beginning of the year, you got a lot more pop-ups on your phone apps that said, "Do you want to use just these tracking cookies, or just the necessary cookies, or can we also use tracking cookies?" In
Mhm.
California, it's the law now, and in Europe. But so my question is just, do those laws go far enough for you? Is it, as when you're going to work and you're saying, okay, we've done enough with our software to make it compliant. Do you follow the letter of the law, or do you go farther than that? Do you have any advice about that?
I feel so. Here's my opinion on America, at least, and this is I'm Canadian American. I'm dual citizen. In case everyone's trying to out me as like a Canadian that's bad mouthing American policy, but like there's a beauty and a double-edged sword to American capitalism in the sense where it allows companies to thrive. But I think what's problematic is that in America, at least, policy and governance is very laissez-faire to what companies are willing to do and what companies are the extent of which they comply. And I say that because like the repercussions, whether they're financial, I don't think the repercussions and the governance are nowhere near enough in America. And I think what I'm happy about now is that public distrust and public opinion is at least one method of circumventing all of the things that companies can do. But I think internally, at least what I'm finding at ServiceNow is even though there's a body of government from leadership that's willing to say, yes, we're doing this, we're complying. There's also a secondary grassroots movement that's happening in a lot of the pockets of research and design and so forth at different tech companies of individuals that are further scrutinizing the place that they work. And I'm thankful to some degree because I don't think it's enough with recent events with researchers being let go from Google and so forth. But I'm at least glad that there's a space for individuals like myself, other researchers, some that are on this call right now, to challenge current practices and on some level wave red flags and torches and be very loud about the things that we could be doing better. And definitely, some companies do it better than others. I've heard horror stories of, uh, certain like tech companies or robotics companies that are starting up that don't blur the faces of individuals and like really lean on just like what's basically legal and as the bare minimum.
Yeah, definitely. We have another question here from Hamid, who asks, what are your thoughts on AI algorithms shaping people's opinions via a feedback loop that creates bubbles of information?
Oh, this was a big deal on social media. I don't know if you guys remember, but like there was a period in time where Facebook had the trending news on the right side. So basically, what were people sharing the most often? And what they found out was it was just creating bubbles and pockets of like similar opinions that weren't being challenged. So people's biases and what they thought were just being perpetuated. Um, I think when the risk is low, like for example, Instagram showing you pictures that they think you might like based on your network of friends, the risk on that is fairly low. I think when it comes to targeted advertising, or when it comes to the type of news that you get surfaced, or the type of article titles that get surfaced to you, that's where it becomes really dangerous. It's to the level now where, if I see something that's interesting and I want to critique it, I will purposely not click on it just because I don't want to feed into that algorithm monster of like what type of news or content gets fed to me next. And that is like a major, major problem. Like my thoughts, actually, you know what? If I could go back to Robert's question about like the top three thing, like the top things that I'm concerned about outside of my work, in terms of what's dangerous with AI, that would be up there, which is creating really isolated, siloed pockets of information, and not allowing differing opinions or the challenging of ideas to take place. Like we no longer have civil, I don't know if we ever had civil discourse, to be honest, but to even allow for discourse.
Um, yeah, I know one of our volunteers couldn't make it today and sent us in a question. Uh, and that question is, what do you do to constantly challenge your underlying beliefs and assumptions?
So man, oh, I love that you guys didn't stray away from hardball questions. Um, the first reaction, like knee-jerk reaction I have when you ask me that is, right now I'm trying to assess if I'm challenging my own inherent biases, beliefs, and assumptions enough. Um, and I don't think it is, to be honest. Like I don't think it is, but some of the things I do, um, to be at least cognizant of my beliefs and like being able to challenge them. And this is something I'm actively working on, which is making myself open to differing opinions, perspectives, and criticisms. And I think that's the hardest part. Like after especially in my work, after the research has been done and we've experienced something in the field, I think sometimes we can be quite intertwined with our convictions. So I try to enter research with customers and individuals being open to ridicule, um, totally open to failing, and really opening discussions with people and having these talks, hopefully with more people, to be open to people criticizing my work in tech and challenging the work that I do, that it's going to take over humanity, and like openly being purposefully selective in putting myself in those conversations. I think that's really important. I think another thing that I do, which I actually like the ServiceNow environment for what we're doing, is right now, for example, today this took place. We're having a conversation right now about ethical governance. And there's a lot of conversation around the nuance of terminology. I think the four of us or five of us in the room today on this Zoom call, we're challenging each other's notions of like how we understood certain terminology, and what would be the most inclusive way to express something, and like how do we go forward, with each part, like each line of text in this governance that we're working towards is like being challenged, and within this group and within other partners. So I think that's another method too. And I think for me, it's the most like really emphasizing this in my answer. The most eye-opening and humbling thing for me has been to hear from people who are very like vehemently against the work that I do, and understanding their fear and automation in technology, and even people that want to be left alone because they have dystopian perspectives on like the type of work that I do. And that's happened a lot in research sessions with customers where like they're very closed off at first, and leaning into allowing them the space to say, I think your work is evil, or so forth. but then in that discourse, kind of changing that narrative both on how I approach creating the technology, and then in their eyes, maybe seeing someone that actually cares about what happens, the bulk of humanity. Yeah, that's a
You're
tough question. Like it really makes me consider and think like, am us, are we as a group and like the work that we do, are we doing enough to challenge our own belief systems and our assumptions? Thanks for asking that.
Morgan asks, what do you think is the most important thing that we, as people in the field, can do to combat these issues, other than just choosing the projects that we work on?
I think, yeah, the actively choosing the projects that you work on is incredibly hard, just because of the nature of like employment. I think the number one thing is to actually be informed and listen and be as well read and versed as possible in the area of expertise that you're working in. So, I mean, not just in the AI space, whatever space that is. When we were creating floor cleaning robots, my team and I spent like a couple weeks doing the service work that we were looking to assist or augment. Really putting yourself in the shoes of the industry that you're trying to impact and learning as much about that industry as possible, as much as possible. So for me now, it's trying to learn about, the enterprise space and the people that work in it, whether they're customer service people or agents that handle incidents that come in or others that are in charge of the technology. But like that would be the most important thing, I think, is to really become well versed in what the people that you're designing for are experiencing and what they care about.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Um, your mention of people having these dystopian perspectives. For those that aren't in the field, what do you think is the main misconception around AI?
I think, though entertaining, the hyper sensationalization of AI in storybooks and sci-fi and movies definitely amplifies that perspective. I've yet to see a benevolent AI story make it to movie theaters where people are very happy about it. Um, I do appreciate, though, that some narratives challenge the way we look at how we interface with technology. Um, I also think it's the way that w- we, and it's a marketing thing, right? Marketing's always been this way. It's the way we hyper amplify what the capabilities of our AI can do. Like AI cures cancer, or like the recent one that I read was like AI detects tumors. A model used to detect pastries was used to detect, tumors or cancer cells. And it's great. Like there's elements of truth to that, but I think we can put more effort into appreciating the simpler things that AI does and like celebrating that too. I mean, like, okay, like AlphaFold and being able to detect protein folding, that is a humongous, like human level achievement. And yes, that's great. But I think within companies, we always want to market like the fanciest, most innovating piece of technology. And I think there's a level set of realism that needs to take place right now so that people realize that your self-driving car is not going to just take off and order groceries for you and go find a new owner.
Very good point. We are approaching the hour. And with this, do you have any closing thoughts or piece of wisdom you would like to impart with everybody here today?
I I think mainly one, like, just thanks for being engaged and showing up and like having these conversations and including more people in this. I would love to see us kind of normalizing the people creating this technology and humanizing what they do. And, I'm reading the comments right now. Yeah, sorry, like, got distracted. And mainly like focusing on the good that the technology can do as opposed to the harm. And I think, the main thing that I could say is just be more involved and have more discussions about like the data that you're providing, the data that how your data is being used, because right now the main court that's really governing these companies is the court of public opinion. So like your opinion and what you choose to do with your data and how you manage um, the models that impact you truly matter. You matter. That's my closing statement, is that you matter, all of you. As like cliche and like rainbow bridge that is like you matter.
That's a wonderful note to leave off on. And for everybody here, don't leave just yet, because this was such an amazing conversation we had today. And thank you, Di, for joining us
Oh, thank you. This was
once
a
again.
really great way to like end the week and stuff like that. And I totally get now that the Rainbow Bridge is something that's like referenced to death, where you like cross the Rainbow Bridge. So I'd like to retract that statement. I meant like unicorns and rainbows.
Well, I love everybody had such great thoughts and questions too. This was super interactive. And if you enjoyed today, please, we have a Slack channel and we continue these sorts of conversations there with everybody that was involved. We also have a lot of job opportunities posted on there. So I just dropped a link in our chat. But yeah, if you enjoyed today, please join our Slack channel.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. And feel free to ping me after if you guys want to talk about tech or bubble tea or cars.
What's your favorite boba?
Hojicha milk tea, except with almond milk, and then grass jelly with 1/4 sweetness.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. I like jasmine. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Oh, Thai tea is pretty good too. Loving
Yeah,
this. Maybe we should have made this an icebreaker.
yeah, that would have been great. But no, I appreciate the hardball questions, and see you on the Slack channel.